Welcome to another explainer. For a brief, fleeting moment after the Cold War, the world actually felt kind of stable. But if we look at the data today, that era is completely gone. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on a staggering $2.9 trillion global defense reality, and we're going to explore the hidden forces that are literally shaping our world right now. Okay, let's dive into this. Because there's this massive paradox at the heart of modern geopolitics. Why in the world would you spend absolutely historic, eye-watering sums of money on weapons if your ultimate goal is to actually avoid fighting? Well, between the US-China rivalry, the war in Ukraine, and continuous conflicts in the Middle East, every major capital on Earth is basically getting the exact same wake-up call right now. And that wake-up call boils down to one incredibly powerful truth: weak countries become fragile. You see, nations aren't just spending massive budgets to put boots on the ground anymore. That's the old way. Today, they're doing it to prevent future economic and geopolitical crises. The logic is that without strength, an entire society becomes completely vulnerable to global shocks. Which brings us to Section 1, Beyond the Battlefield. Let's look at what this defense spending actually means in the 21st century. And this brilliantly illustrates the massive paradigm shift we're seeing. The classic 20th century view of defense was all about dominating land, air, and sea, right? But today, modern defense is completely driven by artificial intelligence, space capabilities, cybersecurity, and data control. The whole outdated view of the military as this isolated separate sector is gone. It's now deeply, deeply intertwined with cutting-edge civilian tech. Because of this, the defense industry has evolved into one of the world's absolute largest economic sectors. Think about it. When a country invests in its military today, it's actively securing its own strategic independence and protecting the global energy routes that literally power our cities. So, these military investments, they're actually direct investments in a nation's long-term economic survival. Take hypersonic missile technologies as a perfect example of this. On the surface, sure, it's a weapon. But building one of these things forces a country to absolutely push the boundaries of AI, advanced materials engineering, and semiconductor chip production. Buying a missile today essentially means buying a ticket to tomorrow's technology race. It's a massive catalyst for innovation across the board. Moving on to Section 2, the art of deterrence. Let's talk about the real financial cost of avoiding a physical fight. This is the foundational psychology of modern military budgets. The primary goal of advanced weapons is actually to prevent the enemy from attacking. The objective is rarely to start a war. Instead, it's to project such overwhelming, undeniable power that the other side is completely dissuaded from ever launching an attack in the first place. Basically, it's the incredibly expensive business of stopping a war before it ever has a chance to begin. So the crucial point is that this strategy comes with some severe side effects. Deterrence is astronomically expensive. Rapidly increasing defense spending is exploding global debt levels, it's driving up inflation, and it's creating massive disruptions in the very energy markets that heat our homes. Economists are warning us that, ironically, this global pursuit of safety is actually making the overall world economy much, much more fragile. Let's follow the money in Section 3, the big three spenders. We're going to look at the nations driving this historic era of armament. $2.9 trillion. That is the projected global military spending for 2025 alone. To put that massive number into perspective, you could fund a manned mission to Mars multiple times over with just a fraction of that money. It's an almost unfathomable amount of capital being diverted into global defense in a single year. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer concentration of all this wealth. Over half of the entire planet's defense budget comes from just 3 countries. The United States accounts for a massive 33% of global spending. China sits at 11%, and Russia is at roughly 6%. That means the entire rest of the world combined makes up the remaining 50%. Let's impartially break down exactly what these 3 nations are actually buying with all that money. The US is primarily focused on maintaining its global superiority and countering China's rise. China, on the other hand, is focused on establishing a technological balance against the US and building its capacities around Taiwan. Meanwhile, Russia's budget is heavily focused on the immediate demands of the ongoing Ukraine war. Let's look a bit closer, starting with the United States. They maintain the largest global military network on Earth. We're talking hundreds of international bases, massive carrier fleets, and nuclear subs. Their strategy relies on heavy investments in space, cyber, and AI defense systems, largely to counter China's rising influence. In fact, international peace researchers actually project that the U.S. defense budget alone will shatter the $1 trillion mark by 2026. Moving over to China, we see 30 years of uninterrupted military budget growth. They are aggressively pouring capital into hypersonic weapons, expanding their naval fleet, and integrating AI into their systems. Geopolitically, they're intensely focused on expanding their military capacity around Taiwan. And according to Pentagon reports, they are rapidly increasing their nuclear warhead count to establish a firm technological and military balance against the US. And then we have Russia, which is expected to dedicate a massive 7.5% of its entire gross domestic product to military spending in 2025. To really put that into perspective, this is one of the highest levels of defense spending relative to GDP in modern Russian history. The main reason for this immense spike is, of course, the prolonged war in Ukraine. Russia's spending isn't focused on futuristic global superiority like the US and China. It's deeply tied to their immediate combat needs right now. They've massively expanded their domestic industry to prioritize the rapid physical production of ammunition, ballistic missiles, and drones. It's all about immediate industrial military output. Let's move to and see how this builds into Section 4, the new arms race. Let's look at what this means for the future world order. So this brings us to the ultimate shift. The old race, that was physical. It was about competing for land, air, and sea superiority using traditional tanks, planes, and missiles. But the new race? It has fundamentally changed. The new battleground is largely technological and economic. Nations are literally competing for the future itself, using AI, cutting-edge microchip tech, space satellite systems, energy security, and absolute control over global data. Which leaves us with a really critical tension to think about. Through this $2.9 trillion global investment, we are undoubtedly buying our way into tomorrow's advanced technology. But by pouring so much of our global wealth into the architecture of modern deterrence, are we making the world economy, and by extension, our everyday lives, too fragile to actually survive it? It's the multi-trillion-dollar question of our time. Thank you so much for joining me to unpack this reality. Stay curious, and I'll catch you in the next explainer. Welcome to today's explainer. We are diving into a massive, fundamental shift that's happening across the globe right this very second. While the world is rapidly rearming itself, literal trillions of dollars are flooding into the defense industry. It's a completely structural change to the global economy. But in the middle of this historic process, we really have to ask ourselves, who are the actual winners here? And honestly, more importantly, who are the real losers? To start off, the sheer unprecedented scale of what we're looking at is just staggering. According to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, or SIPRI, global military spending has surged to absolute historic levels, hitting an astounding $2.9 trillion for 2025. Just let that number sink in for a second. $2.9 trillion. This isn't just a tiny incremental bump. This is widely considered to be the highest recorded defense expenditure in all of modern history. All right, Section 1, the trillion-dollar boom. Let's follow the money. So to really understand the economics of modern global tension, we have to look at the primary actors actually writing the checks, right? And the concentration of this spending is immense. The United States alone is spending approximately $950 billion. Meanwhile, China has allocated a budget of over $330 billion, and Russia is spending upwards of $190 billion. You can immediately see the massive gap between the US and the others. But the real story here goes way beyond just basic national security and buying traditional weapons. The absolutely crucial point to understand is that the numbers are this astronomical because the very nature of conflict has totally evolved. Modern dominance isn't just won on a battlefield. It's secured across 4 critical modern pillars: economics, technology, energy, and data and artificial intelligence. Building dominance in these specific areas requires an entirely different, incredibly massive scale of financial investment. Moving on to Section 2, the obvious winners, the defense contractors. Without a doubt, the most immediate beneficiaries here are the major defense contractors. They are seeing these explosive surges in demand for highly advanced hardware. Countries aren't just out there stockpiling basic ammunition anymore. They are aggressively acquiring fighter jets, highly advanced air defense systems like the Patriot, cutting-edge hypersonic missile technologies, and unmanned drones. They're arming themselves not just for the conflicts happening today, but for the potential wars of tomorrow. To truly grasp the crazy economics behind this, just consider the cost of a single modern F-35 fighter jet. We're talking anywhere between $80 to $100 million just for one jet. And it doesn't stop there. Patriot air defense systems are being sold through multi-billion-dollar agreements, and hypersonic missile programs are carving out giant shares of national defense budgets. So, for defense companies, global geopolitical tension isn't just some political crisis. It represents a devastatingly large, completely unprecedented economic opportunity. Which brings us to Section 3, the hidden beneficiaries, looking beyond just defense. What's quietly happening underneath all of this is that energy companies are actually profiting immensely from this geopolitical climate. Here is how the mechanics actually work. Whenever the fear of war escalates, oil prices inherently rise, and national energy security suddenly jumps to being a critical priority. We saw a prime example of this right after the outbreak of the Russia-Ukraine war. Europe's energy expenditures spiked dramatically, and that led to literal billions of dollars flowing right into new liquid natural gas investments, strategic natural gas contracts, and alternative energy projects. It basically created entirely new, massive economic sectors practically overnight. You see, this modern arms race extends way, way beyond the traditional battlefield of tanks and missiles. Today, modern dominance is defined by artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, massive satellite networks, microchip production, and the ultimate control of data. And because of this massive shift, the world's strongest armies are literally being forced to build the world's most advanced technological infrastructures. And because military dominance now absolutely requires technological dominance, the tech sector has become another massive quiet winner. Technology companies, specifically the ones developing artificial intelligence and next-generation defense systems, are right now securing some of the largest financial investments in human history. The lines between what is a tech company and what is a defense contractor, they are becoming incredibly blurred. For the tech world, national security is rapidly becoming the ultimate growth sector. Section 4. Who pays the price? The ultimate losers in this equation. So as state defense spending goes up, something else inevitably has to give, right? The rising costs of defense, public debt, and energy prices apply a direct, crushing squeeze on what we call falling priorities. Funding for public health, education, and vital social programs faces immense pressure. The harsh reality of a state budget is that $1 spent on a hypersonic missile is literally $1 that is not being spent on a public school or a local hospital. And governments aren't just magically shifting existing money around to pay for this. They are borrowing heavily to fund this rearmament. It is mind-blowing to realize that global public debt has already surpassed $300 trillion. That is an incredibly crushing burden on the global economy. And this sharp, sudden increase in military spending is making that pressure significantly heavier for nations all around the world to bear. It sets off this really devastating domino effect. Geopolitical crises spark the fear of war, which directly drives up inflation and energy prices. This, in turn, breaks down global supply chains, leaving our markets incredibly fragile. And ultimately, who bears this economic burden? It falls right onto the shoulders of everyday citizens. For smaller, developing nations, this dynamic is especially dangerous, as they face severe economic and political pressure while the great powers compete. Finally, Section 5, the ultimate question, looking at global stability. If we take a step back and look at the historical timeline, we start to see a pretty chilling pattern emerge. Prior to World War I, the world engaged in a massive arms race. During the Cold War, the entire global economy was completely shaped by economic and military rivalry. History consistently shows us that these periods of massive rearmament often act as harbingers of major crises rather than actually preventing them. And looking at the present day, we very well might be entering a similar era. Except today, as we've seen, the fierce competition isn't just about stockpiling weapons anymore. It's about achieving total dominance in some very complex new arenas. Artificial intelligence capabilities, the weaponization of space technologies, the super intense chip wars, the control of global energy corridors, and ultimately, absolute global economic power. The world claims it's arming itself to protect peace. But as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with the final lingering question. Is this massive, unprecedented arms race actually preventing war, or is it unknowingly dragging the entire world into a brand new global crisis? It's a question with a $2.9 trillion price tag, and the answer is going to define our future. Thanks for joining me on today's explainer, and keep learning.